You're listening to the 40 Fit Radio podcast, dedicated to the 40-plus community. Join us as we discuss the truth about fitness and health using science, reason, and the experiences of our host and content experts. Welcome to the 40 Fit Nation. Hey, welcome back to 40 Fit Radio, and welcome back to the 40 Fit Nation. This is Coach D, and I've got Coach Trent in the house.
Morning, y'all. Good
morning, y'all. So if I sound a little under the weather or a little nasally this morning, it's because I got these dang allergies going on, and I don't like to take things for them. My wife's like, here, take this, take that, and I just don't like to take a lot of stuff. You know, a lot of that stuff's not good for a male prostate, so you got to make sure that you're being careful with antihistamines and other prolonged use of that type of stuff.
I know what you need.
Yes.
You need some essential oils. That's what's missing.
Hey, don't knock essential oils. You're going to get our listeners angry here.
Okay, so I just finished a podcast.
Okay.
I just finished a podcast series that was on multi-level marketing.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, there are some essential oils companies too.
A lot of companies that's MLMs.
That use the MLM model. Right. So anyways, it's on the mind. But yeah, you can get some peppermint oil or...
Peppermint is like, it revives you and it calms you. I don't know. It's I don't know what it does, but
lavender or
Missy, my wife, Michelle, you know, she has essential oils in the house. So where we sleep, she uses a particular essential oil. I can't remember what it's called, and it aromatizes in the room, and it's supposed to keep infections and viruses and stuff away from us. I don't know if it works. I mean, we could look at the research of it. There's not a ton of empirical research because the FDA doesn't regulate it, you know, and a lot of issues there. But hey, you know, if you're into essential oils, then I am fine with that.
Yeah, I'm not. To be fair, I'm not slagging it.
Right,
but we spray a little like lavender on our pillows sometimes.
Yeah.
It smells nice. It relaxes me a little bit before I go to bed.
Yeah, exactly. Lavender tea. I mean, a lot of the pharmaceutical products that we use today came from botanical areas, you know, botanical sources. So I mean, I think we can't diss that. But hey, guys, today we're going to talk about conditioning. We did a call to action recently on our podcast. And, you know, we got a bunch of questions. We got a ton of questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sending those in.
And we are going to start just rolling out the podcast on these topic matters. And this is one of them. And one of the questions we got was, when should I condition? When should I not condition? Is conditioning more important for body fat loss? Isn't conditioning how you get a leaner body? Isn't conditioning better for your heart health? All these different kind of conditioning thought lines.
Yeah.
And so we're going to do some myth busting today.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about conditioning, why and when, basically. Why is conditioning important? And when should I intervene with conditioning? Or when do I, as a coach, too, use conditioning with our clients and with our client base? So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions, presumptions, suppositions, what have you, about conditioning. And I think it must come from like the American Heart Association or something, but we just had this narrative in our society that, you know, we need to go get some exercise.
Right.
And, you know, we've talked ad nauseum about the difference between exercise and training here on this podcast, but what the medical professionals mean when they say get some quote unquote exercise is they really mean go get hot, sweaty, and tired. Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people associate that with jogging or getting on the treadmill or the elliptical or something like that. And we're here to bust that myth today.
Well, and I think one of the things we have to remember when we're talking about this subject matter is that when you're in the modern medical community, and I am in that group of people, when you're in the modern medical community, and I am in that group of people, you're managing your population many times to the least common denominator.
Right.
And that means that your number one goal is to get people moving. You know, motion's lotion. I've said it 1,000 times. We're trying to get people moving. You recognize that the majority of people out there are not going to do true training and do something that's really hard sometimes. So the goal is walking, moving, being more active throughout your day, sitting less, standing more. We're trying to get people's activity levels up and get their caloric consumption down some, especially in processed foods and those types of things when we talk about diet and high sugar diets. And we're trying to get their caloric burn up. Okay, so their consumption down a little bit and their burn up so that we can improve body mass indexes, okay, BMIs, and we can improve basically body composition. So when you see what the modern medical community promotes to the general public, it's designed basically to, number one, manage the least common denominator, which is most people are lazy. I hate to say that, but that's true. We live in a very sedentary lifestyle or a very sedentary Western culture. And so our goal is let's get moving, folks. Let's get rolling. So
hey, but you listen to 40 Fit Radio, so you're not the least common denominator.
No. You're the jewel.
That's right. So we're going to hold you to a higher standard today when we talk about conditioning. All right, so let's bust some myths here. What's the first one you want to start off? What's the first myth?
Here's a myth. Strength training is not conditioning. That I have to condition to get more conditioned, but strength training does not help my stamina or my endurance. That is one misconception.
I can't say how many times when people find out I'm a lifter, they're like, but what do you do for cardio?
Yeah. Have you ever lifted a heavy set of 5? I guarantee you, your heart rate is elevated all throughout that workout.
Yeah. But at the top of my deadlift, when I lock out a heavy deadlift, my blood pressure is like 1,000.
Yeah.
And then it drops.
But you could have a heart attack then and stroke out.
Yeah, I probably will someday.
By the way, there's more people that die running on a treadmill, stroking out and having heart attacks that there are in a gym doing a heavy deadlift.
Right.
That's the real truth. That's a truth bomb. Boom.
Mic drop.
Yep. There we go. So don't believe the hype. A lot of times we believe things because we want to believe them. We have confirmation bias, or we hear misnomers. And here's the deal, folks. If you repeat something enough times, people take it as truth. That's how modern politics works. That's how PR works. That's how advertising, marketing works.
You remember the food pyramid?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So for years, and the American Heart Association has done some great, wonderful things, and they're still continuing to do some wonderful things. But for years, many national organizations have promoted this or that as the best thing for your health and fitness. And those promotional programs are designed to get you moving, basically, plain and simple.
Right.
But strength training is a form of conditioning.
Absolutely.
First of all, let's talk about this. What is conditioning? When we talk about the term conditioning, body conditioning, let me just throw it out to you this way. Let's open our minds a little bit. Body conditioning is a very broad umbrella term that's used to, I guess, talk about or discuss or address how we're going to condition our bodies. Our body needs to be conditioned in its ability to have strength. It needs to be conditioned in its ability to have flexibility. It needs to be conditioned in its ability to have stamina. All the 10 general physical skills. We could go down the list.
Yeah.
So conditioning, our body's condition is basically the shape and the state with which our body is in. Okay?
Yeah, I would call it, it's really the same thing as fitness. It's fitness for a certain purpose, fitness to the task. Yes. And I think most people would recognize that the more fit you become, the more advanced you become as an athlete, the more specific your adaptation is to the thing which you are training for.
Correct.
Right? We're training for general fitness here, and so we train for general strength. And then later on, as we're going to get to, we train for general conditioning, whatever that means.
Right.
But a powerlifter, an advanced powerlifter, has a fitness and conditioning that is appropriate for his task of lifting the most weight possible. A marathon runner has an appropriate level of fitness and conditioning for their task of running 26.2 miles.
Right. Doing something at a low intensity for a long period of time.
Yeah, and so I think that's one thing that causes a lot of confusion is when we say conditioning, or cardio is the other term that you hear most people use, cardio, what do they mean? we always use the cardiovascular system. That's how our body works.
We wouldn't function. We wouldn't live.
That's right.
If we couldn't.
You'd fall over.
Yeah.
But there are different adaptations that you can gain towards one end of the spectrum of complete strength and power production versus the other end of the spectrum, which is long form, low power production,
ultramarathon,
very low high endurance, right? So, and why is that? Well, if we go back to, you can go back and listen to the conditioning episodes we've done in the past where we talked about energy systems. Right. We're not going to get real deep into that today, but suffice it to say that we have a multitude of energy systems in our bodies that allow for different levels or types of activity. We've got a ATP that's stored locally in the muscle cells that allows for hard, fast, super intense contractions. Then we move down the row to phosphocreatine, glycogen, glycolysis, then into aerobic, fatty acid cycle. So there is a spectrum upon which conditioning exists, and that's important to understand.
Right. So strength training is not conditioning. That is wrong. That is a misnomer. That is a myth. Strength training is a form of conditioning. And we're going to talk a little bit more about another fact that relates to this. So we're going to support that in just a few minutes. Second one is that cardio or conditioning drives your body lean mass or your body fat loss, or better put, better drives your body composition than strength training. Wrong. That is totally incorrect. When you do cardiovascular training or conditioning style training along the spectrum of low weight, lower threshold, longer activities that are more endurance or stamina oriented. Okay, so let's talk about rowing or bicycling or running or all these conditioning type tasks. Okay, or even you could talk about lower intensity activities, and I hate to say this, but like yoga. Yoga, you do at very low intensities for longer periods of time, sometimes maybe an hour class or something like that. It's not high intensity interval training, obviously.
Right.
And so, but any of these activities, okay, a lot of people think that that's what's going to drive the way their body looks or the amount or their body composition. You see, we've really got to talk about body composition, the percentage breakdown between lean mass, which would be bone, muscle, tendon, ligament, fascia, all the connective tissue you have, and fat mass and water, basically. And so that's your body composition: lean mass, fat mass, and then water, okay? And so we've got to talk about the percentages there. But cardio and conditioning does not drive fat loss and body composition improvement better than strength training does. And we're going to talk about another fact related to that in a few minutes. We're going to talk about why that is not the case. Okay, but a lot of people think that if you want to lose more weight and you want to be leaner, that you got to do more cardio. That is totally wrong scientifically, and it's just not accurate. And we're going to tell you why in just a few minutes.
Yeah, if you go back to the 2 episodes we did a 2-parter on nutrition with Robert Santana. Go back and listen to that episode. He told us what the average
calorie
burn is from each, from activity, from thermogenesis, in other words, digestion, and then from just your resting metabolism.
Right.
And I forget the exact number, but it's something like 70%, maybe 75% of your total daily caloric burn comes at rest.
Right.
It's coming from the just regular metabolism of your body.
Right. So your metabolism is what's driving it. And that's important to remember, because we're going to reference that in just a few minutes, and we're going to tell you why it's important to strength train. At the end of the day, that's what we're going to tell you. But here's another one. Strength training doesn't burn as many calories. Wrong. That is absolutely wrong. They've done studies to show that strength training and also some forms of strength-related, I guess you would say high-intensity interval training, okay, which can be, if you look at CrossFit-style workouts where you're doing something where you're doing, power cleans mixed with pull-ups in a row, you're doing a strength movement during that activity at a very high-intensity level.
Right, or pushing like a heavy prowler or stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, but classical strength training, barbell training, burns a ton of calories. Okay. Again, strength training can burn just as many, if not more, calories for the unit of time performed than cardiovascular training or than endurance training, okay, for the unit of time performed, all right? So we got to compare apples to apples, okay? And we've also got to look at what is the calorie burn after the activity. And we're going to talk about why strength training is more valuable for calorie burn overall in just a minute. We're going to talk about that too.
That's right. That's right. Also, when you're looking at, just as an aside here, when you're looking at studies of this stuff, when you're comparing cardiovascular training, long form, slow endurance versus weight training, make sure that they're actually training with weights. If you read the study design and they're doing knee extensions and hamstring curls
or arm curls with 5 pounds.
Yeah, that's not strength training. We're talking about linear progression, adding weight to the bar, high intensity, really pushing yourself.
Heavy. It eventually gets heavy.
Gotta be heavy.
Yeah, it eventually gets heavy.
I think some of the confusion around that stems from the fact that when we say weight training, the general public doesn't always understand weight training as heavy barbell training, right?
All weight training is not equal if presented in a study.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
should just take that for that's just that's the gospel right there.
Right.
So here's another one. Heart health and cardiovascular health is more influenced by cardio than strength training. That's totally incorrect, okay? That is wrong. It's not. Heart health is influenced by several things. Environmental factors. Well, the first thing is genetics. Genetics, okay?
Right.
Influences heart health. If you have poor heart health genetics, you got a strike against you. And so you need to offset that with, your exercise activity, strength training, some conditioning as an augmentation, and then diet is very important, and environmental factors, stress factors, all those things influence it. High sugar diets influence it. I mean, there's a myriad of things we could talk about to improve your heart health, but it's not. I mean, again, I go back to this comment. More people die on a treadmill than they do in a gym lifting weights.
Yeah. I wonder, I don't know this, but how many people die of heart attacks that are like marathon runners?
Quite a few.
Yeah. I mean, it's
quite a few.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. The people that are supposedly the most fit cardiovascularly also suffer from heart attacks.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's higher than the general public. I don't know. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think, again, that's a misnomer. Strength training can be just as effective for heart health, if not more so than conditioning can be, because, again, we're going to talk about the primary reason why that is. Because there's one big, I guess you would say, linking principle here that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, but I want to save it for the facts section.
All right.
Okay. Lean muscular bodies are associated with more conditioning type sports or exercise than lifting. In other words, that people who do more conditioning type exercises, running and those types of things, have leaner, more muscular bodies.
But CrossFitters look so jacked.
Yeah,
and
but
lean.
CrossFitters lift a lot of weights.
Yeah. Yeah.
A CrossFitter is a combined athlete. Basically, they are doing both conditioning and strength training, usually either in the same setting, in the same bout, or through classical strength training in other workouts and then conditioning on other days. So CrossFit has as one of its foundations weightlifting. Weightlifting is one of its foundations. Body weight movements, gymnastics, weightlifting, conditioning, monostructural training, all those things are in the CrossFit program. So, I mean, CrossFit in and of itself, if done correctly, can be very, very effective.
Oh, yeah.
The problem is that most people don't do it effectively.
Yeah.
They don't program it correctly.
I would venture to say that when people are looking at athletes and looking at their body composition and then saying like, oh, well, this is a sport they do, so that must be the reason why they look like this. Well, you're putting the cart before the horse there.
Right.
First of all high-level sports are self-selecting, right? The people who genetically are suited well for that sport will end up at high levels of that sport, right? It's not all driven by their type of training. So when you see an elite level powerlifter who's squatting 1,000 pounds and, he's 6'4" and weighs 385, well, that's because that guy, he's got a crazy amount of muscle mass around his joints. He's huge.
Big bone stock.
Huge skeleton. And
he's meant to be strong.
He's primed to be strong. Yeah. And guess what? He's also determined, because his sport is literally lifting as much weight as possible one time.
Right.
He doesn't need to worry about extra body weight. So if he can add 20 pounds to his body
moves mass
in order to lift a little bit more, why not?
But he's not going to be a great gymnast, and he probably won't be a great marathon runner.
That's right.
He might be able to run a marathon someday if he trained for it.
Sure.
But he's not going to be a great marathon runner.
That's right.
So everybody has a place.
Yeah. So you can't look at athletes, especially high-level athletes, and look at their training to, as a guidance for your own development as an athlete. It just doesn't work. Doesn't work.
So let's talk about this. Let's go to some facts as it relates to conditioning and strength training. Let's go to some facts. And I want to blow something out of the water right here first. And this really relates to more about body composition, because I want to change your mindset on this. And I want you to begin to start thinking with a better first principle in this area.
Yeah. Let's change the narrative here.
Right. Absolutely. So here it is. Diet has more to do with how your body is going to look in a body composition than anything. There are two things, really: diet and genetics. Diet and genetics will drive more of how your body looks than anything else out there. Those are the two big factors that show up in all the research, that also show up in experiential and observational evidence here with our client base and with thousands of trainers and people that I know and people we've trained. Diet and genetics are going to drive how your body looks more than anything. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that all the other things aren't important. They're just as important, because we cannot control our genetics other than we can maximally express our genes through all the things that we do. But we cannot change our base foundational genetics. But our goal should be through exercise or training, through our diet and our lifestyle habits. Again, we're talking about fitness, health, and lifestyle. Our goal as part of the 40 Fit Nation should be to do the things that maximize our genetics by turning on the good genes and maximizing their expression and turning off the bad genes, or I guess you'd say suppressing their expression. You don't turn them off, but you're suppressing their expression. That should be our goal. But diet and genetics are going to control your body composition, or the way your body looks, more than anything. You cannot exercise off or strength train off a terrible diet.
Yeah, never going to happen.
Do either. But let me say this. Here is one fact we're going to cover right now. If I had a choice, and this is what I do every single day when we train clients, and someone came in to me and they were obese, okay, they were overly nourished, the number one thing we're going to start with is strength training, because I want to drive metabolic rate. And the only way that I can drive metabolic rate, or the most effective way that I can drive metabolic rate and give them the biggest return on their time and money investment, is to build muscle mass. When you do cardiovascular training, you're not necessarily building muscle mass. Okay, you might be building some tone of the muscle if you're untrained. But once that happens, that tone state is kind of established.
And even worse, if you do too much long, slow distance type training,
decrease the muscle mass.
You can actually run off muscle mass.
Right.
And there's a really good explanation of how that happens in the Barbell Prescription. So we've mentioned Dr. Sully's book. But it has to do with when you do long, slow distance training, you can blunt the release of an enzyme, which triggers muscle protein synthesis. Right. It's the AMPK switch. You can look that up. So just a post-recording note here. I actually got that explanation a little bit backwards, and I wanted to clarify here. So the AMPK switch that I referred to is actually a toggle between two different enzymes. Strength training activates the AKT side of this switch, whereas endurance training activates the AMPK side of the switch. And what's relevant here is that the AKT side of the switch is anabolic. It helps stimulate new muscle growth, whereas the AMPK side of the switch is catabolic. It inhibits muscle growth. But suffice it to say that there's a crossover point where you're turning off the things which cause your body to undergo muscle protein synthesis to increase your lean mass, and your body recognizes it needs to be light. That's right.
It needs to be light.
And so you can end up doing a lot of work and not doing the muscle recovery muscle building process.
Yep.
And if you're not stimulating new muscle mass, because it's rare that those people who do endurance training also are lifting heavy.
Right.
It's just rare that happens. So they don't have anything to counter that effect from their training.
Right. And so when you strength train, okay, so when you do cardiovascular training, endurance training, you will increase the muscle tone for a short period of time. There's a very short opportunity there of timeline to improve the muscular tone. But after that, most of the effects of cardiovascular training are cardiovascular. They're from the cardio and also in the pulmonary system, okay, in your respiratory system.
Yeah.
But after that, most of those gains are gone. Okay, most of the opportunity is gone. You're not increasing your metabolic rate anymore. Your calorie burn that you're getting from that activity is during the activity and maybe a little bit shortly thereafter. That's it. But when you strength train, you are getting a calorie burn during the activity, okay, and then you're getting paid thereafter forever as long as you continue to regularly strength train. But on the days that you're not strength training, you have built more lean mass, more muscle mass. There's more muscle to service. Think about it this way. If you have 10 cows in the field, they only eat so much hay. But if you have 20 cows in the field, they eat a lot more hay.
Yes.
They burn more hay. If you have 30 and so on and so on and so on, right? Well, think about your muscle mass. You're not creating more muscle cells, but you're making the muscle cell more larger. You're making the cell wall thicker. You're making the muscle cell larger. It needs more maintenance. It needs more glycogen. It needs more energy. It will raise your metabolic rate.
That's right.
You will burn more calories naturally when you're sitting at home watching TV if you're strength training on those other days.
And this is especially important for the novice, because when you are a novice, by definition, you have a lot of strength gains on the table to make.
That's right.
And you also, that also means you have a lot of muscle mass gains to make. When you've been training 3-4 years, when you've been doing strength training for 3 or 4 years, your muscle mass gains are way lower than they were when you started.
That's right.
It's hard to add additional muscle to your body. There's just you've gained most of the benefit that you're ever going to get, and every incremental piece is harder and harder to get. And so that means that your metabolic effect for a really advanced lifter of lifting,
you're already there.
You're already there.
Yeah.
But when you're a novice, you have the most metabolic gain to make by building muscle.
I'll give you a great example. My daughter, she's younger. I mean, she doesn't fit the 40 fit category, but she listens to our podcast.
Oh,
hey,
nice.
Meg. And so,
hey, Megan.
But Megan has lost a ton of weight, and she has done it through diet, portion control, and then she started exercising. She started out with like some conditioning type stuff, and then I finally talked her into strength training, and her fiance strength train now. They do starting strength.
Yeah.
And I think she squatted 170 this week for 5 sets of 3.
That's legit.
And she's deadlifting right at 200 right now. And she's pressing 70, 80 pounds. But I'm just so proud of her, because what she's done is she has not temporarily, but as long as she continues to do regular strength training, 2 or 3 times a week, she is accelerating her metabolic rate. She is growing a factory inside of her that's not necessarily larger, but it burns more energy. Let me give you a good example. If you take an engine in a car, okay, that's supercharged, it can be exactly the same size as an engine that's sitting right next to it that's not supercharged, but one of them uses a ton of fuel.
Right.
And that's what happens in our bodies when we strength train. We grow the lean mass, the muscle mass, and our metabolic rate goes through the roof. That means we burn more calories during our regular daily activities, like Santana had talked about, in just our daily life. About 70% of the burn is just you walking around and doing nothing.
Yeah, sleeping.
Okay, so we want to accelerate the metabolic rate, and we can drive that the most with the greatest return on investment during and after the activity with strength training. Okay, now that doesn't mean that we don't also focus on other things, but our first foundational principle is drive lean mass, drive muscle, drive it like crazy.
That's right. And
that's the goal.
And here's the thing. I've had a lot of clients recently who've asked about conditioning, and this is pretty common. You get 2-3 months into lifting, you're still a novice, you're doing good, you've been on the track, and you start to get a little squirrely about the fact that, I haven't...
Still fluffy.
Yeah, I still got the fluff there. I've definitely gotten stronger. I can see it on the bar. I've gained a little bit of muscle mass, but you're getting a little squirrely about your body composition. Here's the problem if you start trying to condition right now, because that's what everybody wants to do. They want to jump into conditioning now. And I get it. I get the attraction to it, but you've already heard it. It's not going to drive body fat loss right. by itself. Okay?
No, it won't.
It's going to happen with your diet. Here's the other problem, though. If you start trying to condition a whole bunch, you've got a very limited recovery budget as a novice.
Right.
You've got a limited number of dollars, if you will, to spend on recovery. And we know if you get stronger, you're going to have the best effect on your body composition long term.
Right.
But if you start to try to condition a whole bunch, you're going to steal recovery dollars away from
pay me now, pay me later.
From the strength training. And then you're going to stall out way too early. And then when you stall out way too early, now you're not strong. Now you've left a whole bunch of muscle mass gains on the table.
You shunt muscle growth.
And
you shun it.
And now you end up in a spot where you can't recover from the strength training, so you're not getting stronger anymore. And on top of that, you can't condition very hard either because you're not very strong. Let's compare two guys. Let's compare the guy who's got a 315 squat for 3 sets of 5. And now let's take a guy who's got a 185 or 205 squat for 3 sets of 5.
Right.
If I put them on the prowler out there with the same weight and I have them do a bunch of 100-foot sprints, let's say 5-6 rounds, that would be a typical conditioning workout here.
Who's going to burn more calories?
Who's going to burn more calories? So who can push this prowler faster, first of all?
Yeah, the strong guy.
The guy with 315, right?
Same if it was a female. Exactly.
Who could push it for more rounds?
Yeah,
before he's just totally gassed. The stronger guy, right?
Right.
So there's a crossover point
Generally
where,
speaking, yes.
If you're not strong enough yet, then you're not going to condition very hard. You're not going to get much effect from the conditioning anyway.
Right.
So stay the course. Focus on your strength training. The time is coming, not that far from now, when you can start to add some conditioning. And I think that's what you're getting to next
and
when do we add conditioning?
Right. And also, don't blame strength training for the fact that that your body doesn't look like it's as lean as you want it. That is more controlled. Again, change your first principle by diet and your genetics than it is by your strength training. Strength training is going to drive the metabolic rate more than anything.
Right.
And then once we do that, the reason why we don't let a lot of people diet up front is unless they're morbidly obese, okay? We don't let a lot of people diet up front because they're already not getting enough protein. They're already not getting enough good calories usually. And so now if they're morbidly obese, we might taper back their diet on the front end and then strength train with them, and we are essentially losing weight while we're gaining lean mass.
Right.
We can do that. But with someone who is just, a little fluffy, a little overly nourished, not much, even 20, 30, 40 pounds overnourished, and they have a reasonable frame size, then that person, we got to be really careful because if we go into a calorie sparing mode, we might not give them enough nutrition. And so we can do that, and we're good enough as coaches, and there's a lot of coaches out there that can do that, that can do both at the same time, but it becomes more and more difficult the closer you get to a good lean mass level, a good body composition level. So you got to be careful with that.
And that point, to that point right there, that's recovery again, right?
Right.
If you try to start cutting your calories really hard, you don't have much recovery budget yet anyway.
There's not much margin for error there.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, so. You want those resources there. So strength training will drive your metabolic rate better than conditioning. Every single time I will vote for strength training. So the other thing is that we just talked about is that diet will drive your metabolic rate too. The way you eat, what you eat, how much protein you eat. And we have harped on this ad nauseum. You got to get your protein, ladies and gents. You got to get your protein in your diet, okay? Stay away from the processed sugars. Stay away from the junk food. Stay away from the multi-ingredient foods if you can, and eat whole foods, but get plenty of protein in your diet. 125 to 150 grams for females and 150 to 200 grams for males based on body size. You just got to get your protein in your diet. But diet is going to drive, and genetics, more what your body composition is than anything else. So remember that, okay? Training, here's a principle, augments it. Training augments that process, okay? Conditioning is an accessory activity. It is not a primary activity. If your exercise, and I mean that, I'm using that in air quotes, program is a conditioning program, you're missing the mark. You're missing the boat. And you don't have one of the misnomers we talked about, the myths we talked about earlier. Well, I should get in better condition before I strength train. No, you should strength train before you condition.
Right.
That is totally factually inaccurate. That's just wrong thinking, okay, guys? So let's talk about this, like Trent said. When should I start conditioning and why? Let's talk about when first. We have said this, I don't know how many times on this podcast. I will not allow an individual to condition unless they're morbidly obese.
Right.
Extremely obese, okay? I will not allow them to condition until they have developed a good, solid strength foundation. Now, I don't mean a powerlifting foundation. I mean a general strength lifting foundation of good strength and good lean mass. And that's probably going to take them about a minimum of 6 months, at least. Okay. Unless they have a prior training career and they have a lot of time under the bar or a lot of time, in other types of training. But I'm going to stick to mostly strength training on the front end because we don't want to rob you as a client or you as an individual of resources during your recovery mode for that novice progression, that front end. Okay, so let's say now you have built a good strength foundation and you're saying to yourself, well, I want to lose some of the fat around the midline and be a little less fluffy. Okay, again, you're thinking wrong. The reason why you're fluffy is not because you did strength training. The reason why you're fluffy still is because our diet hasn't changed yet.
That's right.
That's the reason why we're fluffy.
Yeah.
It's not because the strength training didn't improve your lean mass and isn't changing your body composition. Here's another thing to remember. People don't understand this. When we say percentage of body fat, it's a percentage of your total mass, of your total body composition. So if your lean mass is driven up and your fat has not increased at all, but it hasn't decreased at all, your fat mass is at a lower percentage.
Yes.
And you're saying, how can that be? I didn't lose fat. No, but you gained muscle.
Yeah.
And so your muscle is becoming a bigger part of that equation.
Yeah.
If I have a bottle or a jar and I have half water, half oil, and there's still room in the jar, let's say, and I pour a little bit more water in, now I've got a greater proportion of water than I do oil. So the percentage of oil decreased.
That's right.
That's exactly what's happening. I'm gaining more lean mass, muscle mass, and so my body fat percentage is going down.
And what you described is essentially the dad bod problem or the skinny fat problem.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
We've heard, and I can't take credit for this, Santana said it, these people don't have a body fat problem, they have a muscle mass problem.
Right. They think their weight is going down, but what's happening is if they're dieting incorrectly and they're not training, they're losing lean mass.
That's right.
It doesn't matter if you're losing weight if it's the wrong stuff.
And
it's the wrong stuff.
We see that a lot with, how many skinny fat runners have you run across?
Oh, tons.
They're very thin, but they have when you measure their body fat percentage, it's actually really high.
Yeah, let me tell you the perfect example. I've treated a ton of people that have gone through gastric bypass surgery, and I don't have anything against that, or they've gone through a lap band or something like that, but they haven't maintained a quality diet during that, so they've almost been malnourished.
Oh, yeah.
And so they've lost 100 pounds, but they are so weak they can't even stand up from a chair.
Yeah.
They can't do sit-to-stands from a chair, and they definitely can't do it with weight. But they've lost a ton of weight. They have lost most of their muscle mass. In that scenario, they can't eat a lot of protein on the front end because it's hard to digest, so they're mostly eating like fruits and vegetables. And even on the vegetable side, they're very low fiber sometimes. And so they're malnourished.
Yeah.
So, I can't tell you how many of them need to be strength training and they need to be getting some form of liquid protein in.
Right.
If that's all you can do, liquid protein, as much as possible during that phase so you can, and then strength train so you can get your lean mass up.
Yeah.
So again, we're talking about this balance. When do we start conditioning?
Yeah.
It is after we've built a strength foundation.
Right.
Because we want to build a bigger metabolic, calorie burning eating engine.
Right.
Then we can start some conditioning. And in that case, we wait till the novice phase is over. The strength foundation is built. Now we look at the individual and we say to them, okay, we've been focusing on getting enough calories during this phase. Now we're going to focus on just basically doing some activities that are going to burn a little bit more calories overall.
Right.
And we're going to change your diet.
Yes.
But the easiest thing to do for us, the hardest thing to do for them, it's called discipline, is to change their diet, improve their diet before we throw a bunch of conditioning in there.
That's right. Yeah.
If they'll change their diet, improve the quality of their diet, their fat mass will start to decline because now they have this big metabolic engine, and they'll start to increase more lean mass, and we don't have to put any conditioning in yet. And I will tell you what, I just did a long elk hunt up in the Rockies. I did very little cardio conditioning for it. I mostly strength trained, and I did just fine carrying 80 to 100 pound pack and climbing up to over 13,000 feet and harvesting elk. And I did just fine over my 50s. Okay. So there's a misnomer that to be in better endurance and conditioning shape, you have to do endurance and conditioning. One of the facts here is that strength training influences metabolically and organically and chemically and structurally your ability to endure better than endurance ever does your ability to be strong. And actually, more endurance training doesn't necessarily improve your endurance capacity once you reach a certain threshold. Only strength training does.
Right.
So again, we talk about some misnomers that people have. So we're going to intervene with conditioning once we have, number one, built the strength foundation. Number two, improve the person's quality of diet. And then we throw in some conditioning as an accessory.
That's right.
It's just augmentation.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, it's common to want everything all at once. That's the way our culture is, and there are plenty of people that will take your money and tell you to your face, like, you can have it all in 90 days.
And let me tell you, as a client, as a coach, let me tell you how easy it is to program conditioning workouts. They're nonsensical.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. If you're programming a CrossFit style workout correctly, and you're programming both in microcycles for the week and then also for the month, and you're doing it for the quarter, and you're doing it biannually and for the year, and you're doing it correctly, it takes some thought. I mean, if you follow their programming model correctly, it takes some thought. And it's not, it's constantly varied, but it's not random.
Right.
It's not you don't just throw some workouts there.
Yeah, we talked about it in the conditioning episode.
That's right.
You're looking at over the course of a month or 6 weeks or whatever your kind of
variance
macro
in all
cycle.
these different types of mediums.
You want to have somebody go through
all the metabolic pathways,
hit different energy pathways, and do
different intensity levels,
skill-based type work, low skill, high skill, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that remind yourself that this is a long process. You didn't, if you are coming from a position where you're overly nourished,
right?
That didn't happen overnight.
Right.
And getting to a lean, hard body that you want is not going to happen overnight either. And unfortunately, there's plenty of people who want to tell you that that's possible in 30 days, whatever. And I'm sorry, not going to happen. So stay in the game.
Get the order right.
Stay the course.
Yep.
Do the strength training, and then layer in that conditioning after you've finished the novice phase and you've truly run it out. It's probably going to be about 6 months down the road when that happens, and you'll be in a better place.
More or less, yeah.
Yep. And then remember, from there it becomes a game of managing your diet to get down there.
Recovery and even then when you start augmenting with conditioning, you got to be careful because if you want to continue to make some strength gains or even sometimes just maintain, it can rob you of the resources for continuing to maintenance that lean mass.
Absolutely.
But how does that look with most lifters that I work with? I will generally throw one conditioning workout in first that's at a much higher intensity level, kind of a HIIT workout.
Yeah. And
then I'll follow that, if we want a little bit more, with something that's a little bit in the middle range of time domain and intensity levels. So one of them might be something like rowing sprints or arm bike, Tabata bikes, or intervals, biking intervals on our Echo bike, Rogue Echo bike, or like an assault bike. And then I also might throw a CrossFit-ish style workout with some weight, with a little bit of weights in there, just to increase the intensity. And then we might do some sleds, and we might do a 20-minute sled workout, that's a little bit lower intensity. That's just kind of a little bit longer enduring activity. By the way, guys, you're using all the metabolic pathways all the time. You're just using one more than another based on the type of energy demands that your body is being asked for. So
that's right.
we start with 1 day of conditioning, go into 2. I very rarely will have clients do more than 2 days of conditioning.
Yeah.
They can't do it. It's just too much work.
That's right. That's right.
3 strength training sessions and 2 conditioning sessions. If they're a much older individual, I might only do 2 days a week of strength and 2 days a week of conditioning.
Sure.
And go to something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe one exception to what we've talked about in terms of programming conditioning that I will do is if I get, occasionally I will get somebody that comes in that's usually in their late 60s or older, in their 70s maybe, that has severely limited range of motion. And it's going to be some time before we're able to get to full range of motion barbell lifts. They're still going to focus, like their strength training still looks like LP, right? They might be doing a high box squat with a barbell, or maybe even sit to stands for a little while with increasingly heavier weights. So I'll have them hold like a kettlebell or a plate as they do sit to stands, and we'll progress to a barbell lift. But we might be squatting high for a while and slowly getting that range of motion back over time. And there may be for some of these clients, they may never hit a full depth squat, let's say. And the same applies to their squat and their deadlift. They may never pull from the floor. They may only be able to get to a rack pull. Whatever the limitation is, for these people, it's going to be a long time before their barbell lifts are stressful metabolically, because they're just trying to gain range of motion, mobility, all that stuff back. And so for that client, I will add some conditioning twice a week to the end of their barbell workouts, just like we've been talking about. And I will do that fairly early. I'll do that in the first month of training, but that's because they have limitations that are keeping them from strength training normally.
Right.
And I'm just trying to get them to do more work in general. And so that's the one exception, but that's rare.
Yeah.
The 99% of my clients are doing exactly what you just said.
Well, and the first thing I want to do on the front end is I'm going to change their conceptual thought line on what is needed to get them to where they need to go. So that's one thing we work on. If we do any conditioning, it's mental conditioning on the front end.
Right.
I want to get them thinking right with first principles about what's going to be most effective for them now and long term.
That's right.
And that's what we do with our clients. So, hey guys, so last thing about conditioning. We presented in a forum, in a strength coaches forum several years back, some research on when should conditioning be done, what type, if you're still strength training at a fairly high level. And it seems that the best manner to use conditioning is to concurrently train conditioning with your strength training on the same day.
Right.
So you might do strength training in the morning and do a high intensity interval training in the afternoon. That seems to be more effective than using your recovery day on the following day and doing a high intensity interval training, and then you have to strength training the next day.
Right.
So do them on the same day, and make sure that you might put your harder conditioning workout, if you're doing a light day and you're strength training, on your 80% day or on your light day. If you're doing like an HLM program, you might put your little bit more high intensity there, and you might put your less intense bout on your heavier day.
Sure.
And so work on just making sure that concurrent strength training is more effective with high intensity interval training than like long, slow distance training. I would never have one of my lifters or one of my clients do a heavy bout lifting session and then on the same day go out and run a tempo run of 10 miles. It'll crush them on the recovery side.
Yeah.
One is driving metabolic rate up, hormones up, and the other one's doing just the opposite. It's driving metabolic rate down eventually, lean mass down, and hormones down. That's just, those two things don't mix.
Right.
So remember that when you're training, and that's what the data and research says right now. So guys, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully we thoroughly confused you.
Myths busted.
Yes, and we busted some myths, but go back and listen to this. Just take little snippets. Think about it. Think about what we're saying, because there's a lot of good nuggets in this podcast. And man, thanks for joining the 40 Fit Nation and 40 Fit Radio today. You can find us at 40 Fit Radio on Instagram, at the 40 Fit Nation Facebook group, info@40fit.com if you want to email us, or you can just reach out to Dr. Deaton on Instagram or Marmalade Cream at Marmalade Cream on Instagram and ask the coaches questions. But man, thanks for being a part of the 40 Fit Nation.
Thanks, y'all.